Okay, so here we are at the very end of chapter 21, and we've talked a fair bit about the chemical buffer systems, the buffer systems in the body that can almost immediately, as soon as acid is produced, can help to rebalance the body around acid-base balance. Now we're going to talk about two physiological systems that are important in balancing acids and bases in the body. And then we'll talk about what happens when we get out of balance. So the physiological buffer systems are two means of bringing our body back into acid-base balance when we get out of balance. And they step in if the chemical buffer systems cannot quickly bring us back into balance. And so we got two ways that we can do this. One would be around how much CO2 we breathe out. Hard to believe, I know, but breathing out CO2 can affect acid-base balance in the body. And so we're going to have to go back and look at that carbonic acid equation one last time. And then also peeing away acids or bases from the body can also be a piece of how we balance. So by determining how much hydrogen ion or bicarbonate ion we put into our urine, then we can restore balance in the body as well. So that's renal excretion then of hydrogen ions and other materials. So we can breathe out CO2 or stop breathing out CO2, and we can pee out hydrogen ions or stop peeing out hydrogen ions. So let's first look at respiratory excretion of carbon dioxide. And I'm just, for reference, I'm going to put up that carbonic acid equation where water with CO2 dissolved in it does a reversible reaction that produces carbonic acid, which also can then do a reversible reaction where the carbonic acid falls apart into hydrogen ions and the bicarbonate ion. Okay. So now I like to think of it as sort of a teeter-totter when I think about equilibrium around this equation. If pH were to drop, so I'm going to show our teeter-totter here, where this is the left side of the equation, here's the right side of the equation. If pH has dropped, then we know we've got lots and lots of excess hydrogen ions. This equation then, as it tries to balance, is going to push these hydrogen ions over back toward the left side to create balance. So what will happen is that we're going to increase the amount of CO2. If we have excess hydrogen ions, we're going to increase the amount of CO2 that's in the blood. That will then pull this into the equation down, pull this into the equation up, and restore balance. So now we're going to wind up with a bunch of extra CO2 in the body. So to remove that CO2, we're just going to increase the depth and rate of breathing. So by blowing away this CO2 that's extra, then we actually wind up removing hydrogen from the body. If, on the other hand, pH becomes high, that means we have lost hydrogen ion from the body. Well, what can we do to get more hydrogen ion? We can allow CO2 to accumulate, and that excess CO2 can then be converted over to the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate, which will pull this into the equation downward again, restoring balance. And so by slowing the amount of breathing that we're doing, we can, because the respiratory center isn't responding, saying breathe faster, by slowing the amount of breathing, we can let CO2 accumulate, and that will drive the equation to the left, allowing hydrogen ions to accumulate, and once again decreasing pH, bringing us back into balance. So this can happen in a relatively short period of time. Over the course of several minutes, we can resist change in pH by altering the amount of CO2 that we breathe out. Breathe out more CO2, we make the body more basic. Breathe out less CO2, we can make the body more acidic. Okay, so that's how breathing can affect pH. Let's look at how urine can affect pH. Okay, so we haven't yet talked about the urinary system, so I'm going to give you a quick overview on how the urinary system works. And this is quick and dirty. So if this is the urinary bladder, and this is up in the kidney. So the way that we make urine, and again, this is super simplified, is because we have millions of these little units called nephrons in our kidneys. And blood enters a nephron and comes to a capillary network. And high blood pressure pushes out plasma from the blood in this capillary network. And then the blood goes away and comes to another capillary network. But we're not going to worry about that yet. So we produce a bunch of plasma that gets squeezed out of the blood and into this structure called the nephron tubule. So we send blood plasma with everything in it, all the waste materials and even the good stuff. And so we pull out from this plasma all the stuff that we want, stuff that's happy, and we can, including water comes out, and any glucose that's in the blood comes out, and then we can put into the blood, into the developing urine, we can put hydrogen ions, bicarbonate ions, and any other waste materials that we want to get rid of. And so eventually, we've pulled out most of the water, put in all the bad stuff, and that then gets transported off to the urinary bladder as our urine. So, we can add lots of hydrogen ions if we produce sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, other metabolic acids. We can take the hydrogen ions that we've made and put them into the urine as it's developing. Another way that we can get rid of the hydrogen ion is by taking the ammonia that we produce as a byproduct of using amino acids to make energy, to make ATP energy. We can take that ammonia, put a hydrogen ion onto it, that's called the ammonium ion, and so we can excrete in our urine bunches of NH4+. That can't be reabsorbed back into the body. Once that makes it into the urine, it will stay in the urine instead. So we can adjust the pH of our urine depending on the needs of the body. So if we have become acidic in the body, we're going to see a lot of hydrogen ions in the urine. If we become basic in the body, then we're going to see a lot of bicarbonate ions in the urine so that we can retain hydrogen ions. This is a much longer balancing process. It can take at minimum 24 hours to get into balance, and it may take several days in order to buffer any pH changes that we see in the body using the urinary system. Okay, so I know that was a quick look at urine production, but if you keep in mind that what we're doing to make urine is squeezing out all the fluid from the blood, or a lot of the fluid from the blood, and then drawing back the fluid and anything that we want in the body from that developing urine, and then putting stuff that we want to completely get rid of from the body into the developing urine. Doing those two processes, we are able to make urine and balance acids and bases in the body. Okay, so now let's start looking at some of the imbalances that can happen. So normal pH for extracellular fluids is somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45, slightly on the alkaline side of neutral pH. So acidosis is when we get our pH below 7.35, and it occurs as we accumulate acids or lose lots of bases. And alkalosis, on the other hand, is a pH greater than 7.45, and it's caused by accumulating base or losing acid. So if we retain bases or lose acid, then we become alkalotic. Compensation, then, is what all the processes, either because of chemical processes or physiological processes, that we engage in order to return to homeostasis in pH. That's compensation. So, if we go into respiratory acidosis, this occurs as we see an increase in blood CO2 that results in increased carbonic acid produced in the blood, which then breaks apart with the hydrogen ion running around, causing all sorts of havoc. And this can be caused by anything that gets in the way of being able to ventilate the lungs, pulmonary ventilation. So it may be that we've damaged the respiratory centers in the brainstem, and we see decrease in breathing, and so that decrease in breathing results in the increase in CO2 in the blood. Or if the air passages get obstructed in some way that interferes with external respiration. Or finally, if we have diseases of the lungs, COPD would be an example, pneumonia, emphysema, any of those that interfere with the gas exchange in the lungs, that's going to cause respiratory acidosis. In response to respiratory acidosis, we'll see depressed function of the central nervous system with drowsiness and disorientation, stupor, and even cyanosis. So you can get that bluish kind of cast to the skin and to the mucous membranes. So that's respiratory acidosis. Anything that blocks the ability to breathe out CO2 will lead to respiratory acidosis. Metabolic acidosis, on the other hand, is caused by lots of metabolic acids in the blood or the loss of base from the body. So if the kidneys can no longer filter out lots of fluids from the blood and acids accumulate in the blood, then we have what's referred to as uremic acidosis. Uremic meaning associated with urine production. So kidney disease can cause metabolic acidosis. If we vomit so much that we actually empty the duodenum, where we're producing all those bicarbonate ion, HCO3 minus, we're putting lots of HCO3 minus into the digestive system at that point. If we vomit so hard and so much that we actually blow away, or blow, that's a more terrible way to think of it, but vomit up a bunch of bicarbonate ion, then that can also cause metabolic acidosis. If we have really bad diarrhea that empties the alkaline intestinal secretions, then that, again, is loss of base and metabolic acidosis. And then diabetes mellitus and all the fat metabolism that we associate with that can result in productions of a lot of these acidic ketone bodies, called ketonemic acidosis. And then last of all, the loss of bicarbonate ions in the urine can also result in loss of base, and therefore the loss of metabolic acids. Dadgummit, is the loss of base and therefore metabolic acidosis. So metabolic acidosis is if any of these metabolic processes result in acidosis in the body. So how do we compensate for acidosis? Well, the chemical buffer systems first resist that shift, especially protein buffering, and by hemoglobin. So there inside a red blood cell, hemoglobin can do a lot to resist the acid shift caused by excess CO2 in the body. We can breathe out. So panting is another way that we can compensate for overproduction, or that overproduction of acid in the body. And then finally, we will see over the course of 24 to 48 hours a lot of hydrogen ion being excreted in the blood. So if acidosis remains uncompensated for allowing further increase in acid in the body, and we get below pHs of 6.8 for several hours, we can see the body go into coma and even see death as a result. Respiratory alkalosis is an acid-base imbalance that is the result of hyperventilation, and it can result and we may go into hyperventilation as a result of anxiety, as fever, because fever has driven us into hyperventilation, or because we overdose on aspirin or other drugs that are called salicylates, can result in hyperventilation, and even low O2 pressure at high altitudes can result in hyperventilation. So if we hyperventilate, we're blowing off so much CO2 that the body goes into alkalosis. And some of the symptoms of this alkalosis, because we've blown off all this CO2: lightheadedness, agitation, dizziness, tingling sensations, especially in the extremities, and spontaneous tetanic contractions. So, getting really cramped up hands and feet can be a result of respiratory alkalosis. And it's all caused by excessive loss of CO2, and we compensate that excessive loss of CO2 usually by reduced stimulation of the respiratory centers that slows down, or from the respiratory centers that slows down the respiratory rates, reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that we're losing, and allows some acids to build back up again, compensating that alkalosis. Metabolic alkalosis results from the loss of hydrogen ions or the gain of base, and it can be caused by prolonged vomiting that empties the stomach of acids, or by gastric lavage, pumping the stomach. By the way, if you're hearing noises in the background, my family's gotten up and somebody started the washing machine, so that's what it is. Sorry about that. So prolonged vomiting can cause us to vomit up all the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, causing the body to go into metabolic alkalosis. If we overuse diuretics and wind up peeing out too much acid, that can lead to metabolic alkalosis. Or if we overuse antacids, like sodium bicarbonate, that is the baking soda, or calcium carbonate, that would be like Tums. Oops. There we are. Sorry about that. So overuse Tums, then you can wind up buffering too much acid and drive yourself into metabolic alkalosis. So how do we compensate for alkalosis? Well, decreased breathing rate and depth will help us to maintain CO2 in the body, which will then turn body fluids a little more acidic. Or we can hold on to hydrogen ions and reduce the amount of hydrogen ions that we're peeing away. Or we can even pee out some of the bicarbonate ion, making our urine a little bit more basic and taking away base from the body. And if it goes uncompensated and we wind up with a pH of 8 or greater for several hours, then what we'll most likely see, is convulsions. So people can have seizures and eventually death. Okay, so there we are. The effects that we see in acid-base imbalances in the body. So imagine for a moment then if you have a patient and you see them lying in bed, they're not exerting themselves, but they're panting heavily. What you would suspect is that they are in acidosis, some sort of metabolic acidosis. And that panting is an attempt by the body to blow off CO2 from the body and restore acid-base balance. All right, so as always, if you have any questions, be sure to give me a phone call, drop by office hours, or send me an email.